My husband invited his mistress to my birthday party and sat her at our table. He pretended not to know her. I smiled silently and said one phrase. All the guests turned to look at him and, "Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think I had a good life. Not a perfect one. Nobody does. But a solid, real, American kind of good. A 3-bedroom house in Naperville, Illinois with a porch I repainted every spring. A job I was proud of. Senior project manager at an architectural firm downtown Chicago. 2 kids, Lily, 11, and Connor, 8, and a husband named Daniel, who I had loved since I was 26 years old and stupid enough to think that love, by itself, was enough to hold a marriage together. Daniel Harrow. Tall, sandy-haired, the kind of man who fixed things around the house on Saturdays and coached Connor's Little League team on Sundays. To anyone watching from outside, we were a success story. 14 years of marriage, a shared mortgage, a shared bed, a shared life. But something had shifted. Not all at once. It never happens all at once. It happened slowly, the way water erodes stone. Little things. He started going to the gym at 6 in the morning, which was new. He bought cologne I didn't recognize, something sharp and expensive that I never saw on our bathroom shelf. He began tilting his phone screen away from me when he typed, a gesture so small and practiced that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. Almost. There were other things. A weekend work conference in Atlanta that left no hotel charge on our shared credit card. A dinner with the guys from the office that he mentioned 3 days after it apparently happened. A name, Melissa, that appeared once in a text I glimpsed by accident, attached to 3 laughing emojis and a message that ended with "Miss you already." I didn't confront him. Not then. I know people always ask, why didn't you say something? But there is a kind of knowing that sits inside you like a stone, and you carry it quietly because you are not ready for your whole life to crack open. I carried it for 4 months, and then came my birthday. I turned 40 on a Thursday in October. Daniel insisted on throwing a dinner party. Our dining room, 20 people, catered appetizers, the good wine. He said it was to celebrate me. I believed him, or I wanted to. I spent the afternoon at the salon, came home in a blue dress I had bought for exactly this occasion, and stood in my own kitchen feeling, for the first time in months, like maybe I was wrong. Maybe the suspicion was just anxiety. Maybe we were fine. The guests arrived at 7. Friends, colleagues, our neighbors, the Brennans, Daniel's brother Greg and his wife. And then, at 7:15, the door opened one more time, and Daniel said, "Oh, everyone, this is Melissa. She works in my department. Hope it's okay I invited her, sweetheart." He said sweetheart to me, while she stood in my doorway. She was 32, maybe 33. Dark hair, very put together, the kind of woman who holds a wine glass like she's done it in nice rooms her whole life. She smiled at me with warm, practiced ease, as if we were strangers who had never intersected, as if she had not been texting my husband "miss you already" at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. Daniel pulled out a chair at our table, the one we had picked out together at a furniture shop in Evanston, and seated her directly across from me. I felt everything at once, the cold drop in my stomach, the heat behind my eyes, the very specific rage of a woman who has just been handed proof she didn't want. But I also felt something else. Clarity. The kind you only get when the last excuse disappears. The table was noisy. Someone was laughing. Someone poured wine. Daniel was talking to Greg, relaxed, performing the role of the good host. He did not look at me. He did not look at her. He performed the role of a man who barely knew she existed. I picked up my wine glass. I smiled. A real smile, calm and slow, and I said loudly enough that the conversation at our end of the table faltered. "Melissa, I'm so glad you came. I've been meaning to meet you. I've heard so much about you. Though I imagine Daniel described me very differently to you than he did to me." The table went quiet, every head turned toward Daniel. His face did not fall, it froze. And that was the moment I understood. I was not going to cry. I was not going to beg. I was not going to pretend. I was going to win. The party ended early. Of course it did. There is no recovering a dinner table from a sentence like that, not with polite conversation and dessert. People said their goodbyes with that particular American discomfort, the kind that lives in too long hugs and vague promises to catch up soon. Our neighbor, Carol Brennan, squeezed my hand on the way out and said nothing, which was the kindest thing anyone did all evening. Daniel waited until the caterers left. Then he came into the kitchen, where I was loading the dishwasher with slow, deliberate movements, and said, "That was unnecessary." I didn't answer him. I closed the dishwasher door. I went upstairs. I lay in the dark next to a man I had shared my life with for 14 years, listening to him breathe, and I did not sleep. The fear came in the night, the way it always does, quiet and total, like a tide. What would this mean for Lily and Connor? What would this mean for the house, for the mortgage, for the version of my life I had built piece by piece since my mid-20s? I had a good salary, but Daniel's income was a third of our household budget. I had friends, but half of them were our friends, the kind who would be forced to choose. I had a life I loved, and it was built in part on ground that had just cracked. I lay there and I let myself feel all of it. The grief, the humiliation, the rage. I gave it the night. In the morning, I got up before Lily and Connor, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. I am a project manager. It is my job to look at a complex, moving problem and break it into steps, to identify resources, risks, and outcomes, to work backward from the goal. I had spent 15 years doing exactly that for other people's buildings and other people's money. I could do it for my own life. Step 1 was information. I needed to know what I was actually dealing with. Not suspicions, not glimpsed text messages, not the cold, sick feeling in my chest. Facts. Duration, depth, documentation. I needed to understand the financial picture completely. Not my half of it, all of it. Joint accounts, his personal accounts if possible, any assets I wasn't aware of. I needed to understand my legal position before I did anything visible, which meant I needed a lawyer, not a friend who had gone to law school, a divorce attorney, a good one. I spent that morning while Daniel was at the office and the kids were at school calling 3 firms. I had done my research the night before on my phone, under the covers with the screen brightness turned all the way down. I chose a woman named Patricia Owens at a firm in Oak Brook. She had 22 years of family law experience and a reputation for being thorough. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. I paid the consultation fee on my personal credit card, the one that predated our marriage and had only my name on it. Then I called my bank and quietly opened a new personal savings account. I didn't move any money, not yet, not without legal guidance. But I needed a vessel, a place that was only mine. I also called my sister, Dana. She lived in Portland, Oregon, far enough away that she'd had no part in our social life, close enough in every other sense that she was the first person I trusted with any of this. I told her everything. The gym, the cologne, the texts, Melissa at the dinner table. Dana was silent for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, "Tell me what you need." "Not yet," I said. "Right now, I just need you to know." I was not ready to tell anyone else, not until I understood the shape of what I was facing. Daniel came home that evening and behaved as though the party had never happened. He kissed the top of Connor's head, helped Lily with a math problem, made pasta for dinner. He was, as always, excellent at performing normalcy. He glanced at me once across the kitchen with an expression I had seen before, a careful blankness, the look of a man waiting to see whether the storm had passed. I gave him nothing. No anger, no coldness, no tears. I handed him a bowl of pasta and talked about Connor's baseball schedule like it was any other Wednesday. I had learned something the night before, sitting in the dark. My greatest asset was that he did not know what I was thinking. He expected either a confrontation or a collapse. I would give him neither. The plan was simple in its first form. Get information, get counsel, get prepared. Move slowly. Move precisely. Don't tip my hand until I held all the cards. It was the most difficult kind of patience I had ever practiced. But I had been patient for 4 months already without knowing why. Now I had a reason. Now I had a direction. Patricia Owens had an office that looked exactly like confidence. Dark wood, orderly bookshelves, a clean desk with a single yellow legal pad on it. She shook my hand, offered me coffee, and then sat down and listened without interrupting for 11 minutes while I laid out everything I knew. When I finished, she said, "First thing, don't move any money, don't change any accounts, don't do anything financially visible yet. Second thing, do you have independent income?" I told her about my salary. She nodded. "Good. Third thing, I'm going to need you to start documenting everything. Not obsessively, but consistently. Dates, incidents, expenses that don't fit the household pattern. And if there is any opportunity to obtain communication records, texts, emails, through legitimate means, that's worth pursuing." She walked me through Illinois divorce law, equitable distribution, marital assets, the children's custody arrangements, which, she said plainly, were almost always the sharpest point of any contested case. She told me what to expect if Daniel chose to fight it, and what leverage I might have depending on what I could prove. "Is there evidence of the affair?" she asked. "Not documented," I said, "not yet." She gave me the name of a private investigator she worked with regularly, a woman named Carla Fuentes, efficient and discreet. I called her from the parking garage. The weeks that followed had a strange double quality. On the surface, ordinary life continued. I drove the kids to school. I attended project meetings in the city. I made dinner. I slept beside Daniel in our bed, which had become the loneliest place I had ever been. Beneath the surface, everything was moving. Carla Fuentes was worth every dollar. Within 11 days, she had photographs. Daniel and Melissa at a restaurant in River North, a Tuesday evening when he had told me he was working late, his hand on hers across the table. 2 photographs from a parking garage, his car, her entering it, and 1 more, taken 3 days later, the 2 of them entering an apartment building on North Michigan Avenue. The building, Carla confirmed, was where Melissa lived. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a Whole Foods and looked at those photographs on my phone for a long time. I had known. Of course I had known. But there is a specific pain in the moment. Knowing becomes proven. When the last 2% of hope you didn't realize you'd been hoarding disappears. I let myself cry for exactly 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face, walked into the store, bought milk and bread and apples, and drove home. But something had shifted on the other side too. Daniel had been watching me. I had been too composed, too even-keeled. He was used to reading me. 14 years of marriage gives a person a map of another person. and something in my steadiness was making him uneasy. I could see it in small ways. He started coming home earlier. He asked more questions about my day, with an attention that felt like surveillance rather than interest. He suggested, out of nowhere, that we should talk about the party. That phrase again, the party. As though it were a minor social awkwardness rather than the moment I had looked across my own dinner table at the woman he was sleeping with. I told him I appreciated that and that I wasn't quite ready, and I smiled. His jaw tightened slightly. And then there was Melissa. I discovered, through the kind of ordinary internet searching anyone can do, that she had found my LinkedIn profile. The visit showed up in my analytics. She hadn't disguised it. Whether that was careless or deliberate, I couldn't be sure. But she knew what I looked like in a professional context now, what I'd built, what I was. I felt the intrusion of it like a cold hand. My appointment with Patricia the following week was decisive. I handed her Carla's documentation. She reviewed it with her reading glasses on and her face professionally still, and then she looked up and said, "This is more than enough. Whenever you're ready, we file." "Not yet," I said. "There are financial things I need to understand first." She nodded. "Then we use this time well." I left that office knowing there was no version of the future that looked like what I had imagined when I was 26. The marriage was over. It had been over before I knew it. The question now was not whether, but how. And how was everything? The point of no return had been crossed. I had proof. I had counsel. I had a plan. I had, for the first time in 14 years, acted entirely on my own behalf. I filed for divorce on a Monday morning in December, 3 weeks before Christmas. Patricia Owens filed the petition with the DuPage County Court. The papers were served to Daniel at his office. His office, not our home. That was deliberate. I didn't want the children anywhere near the moment it landed. He called me 4 times between 11 and noon. I didn't answer. I was in a project meeting in the city discussing floor plans for a civic center in the western suburbs, and I let my phone vibrate silently in my jacket pocket while I talked about load-bearing walls and permit timelines. When I stepped out at noon, I called him back. "What is this?" His voice was very controlled. More controlled than I expected. "It's exactly what it says it is, Daniel." A pause, then, "We need to talk about this." "We will," I said, "through our attorneys." That evening was the hardest. I had already spoken with Lily and Connor the night before, with the help of a child therapist Patricia had recommended. I had told them carefully, in age-appropriate language, that their dad and I were going to be living separately. Lily cried. Connor didn't fully understand and asked if they were still going to baseball in the spring. I told him yes. I held them both for a long time. Daniel moved out 2 days later. He went to his brother Greg's house, 40 minutes away. I thought that would be the shape of it for a while. The quiet, procedural machinery of legal separation. I was wrong. 4 days after Daniel moved out, his mother called me. Sandra Harrow was 64 years old and had never particularly liked me, which she had always disguised behind politeness. Now the politeness was gone. She told me I was destroying this family. She told me Daniel had explained everything to her, though she did not specify what everything meant. She told me that Lily and Connor needed their father under the same roof, that I was being selfish and vindictive, and that if I continued with this nonsense, she would make sure everyone who knew us understood what kind of woman I was. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Sandra, please don't call me again. Any communication regarding the children should go through the attorneys." And I hung up. 3 days after that, Melissa called me. I don't know how she got my number. I answered because I didn't recognize it. Her voice was steadier than I expected, almost rehearsed. She said she thought it would be better if we could speak woman to woman. She said that she and Daniel were serious, that this wasn't something casual, and that she thought I deserved to know that. And then, carefully, with a kind of deliberate calm that felt like a threat dressed in reasonable language, she said that she had certain information about my conduct during the marriage that could complicate things in a custody proceeding. I said, "I don't know what you think you know, Melissa, but I'd advise you to stop contacting me or I'll have my attorney file for a harassment order." She hung up. I sat in the silence of my kitchen and breathed. The children were at school. The house was very still. I understood now the shape of what they planned. Not a quiet, procedural divorce, but a fight. They would try to dirty the case, manufacture doubt about my character, make the custody arrangement the battleground. I called Patricia that afternoon and told her everything. She was unsurprised and unbothered. Melissa Wells has now made direct threatening contact, which is documented. Sandra Harrow made threatening phone contact. Both of these are on record. They've given us gifts, frankly. She paused. "How are you holding up?" I told her I was fine. After I hung up, I realized that for the first time, I wasn't sure if that was true. I called Dana. I asked her if she could come. She was on a flight from Portland the next morning. We spent the weekend doing almost nothing. We watched movies. We drove the kids to their activities. We made soup and sat at the kitchen table until midnight, talking about things that had nothing to do with Daniel or Melissa or the divorce. And somewhere in that ordinary weekend, the tightness in my chest loosened enough that I could breathe deeply again. Sunday night, after the kids were asleep and Dana was in the guest room, I sat alone on my porch with a cup of tea and the cold December air, and I made a decision. I would not let them frighten me into a smaller version of this. The threats were fear. Fear was proof they had something to lose. January came in gray and cold, the way Illinois Januaries always do, and with it came what I could only describe as a siege by 1,000 small gestures. Daniel's approach had changed, the anger of December, the controlled fury in his voice when the papers were served, the tight jaw, the clipped texts through attorneys, gave way to something more calculated. He began what I could only call a softening campaign. He asked through proper channels to take the children for an extra evening during the week. I agreed, because it was reasonable and because I had no grounds not to. He sent Connor a baseball glove for his birthday. He picked Lily up from school one day and took her for hot chocolate, which he mentioned at dinner with the complicated loyalty of an 11-year-old who loves both her parents. And then, in the 3rd week of January, he texted me directly, not through the attorneys, with a single message. "I'd like to have coffee, just to talk, for the kids' sake." I read it 3 times. I understood what it was. It was a door, left ajar, an invitation to step back into negotiation that happened on his terms, in his register, in the emotional space where he had always been more comfortable than I was. He was good in conversation. He was warm and reasonable and capable of making you feel across a coffee table that your grievance was a misunderstanding. I typed back through the attorney channel where it belonged. "All communication should go through counsel. Thank you." Melissa, meanwhile, had gone quiet after our phone call, but she had not disappeared. She was watching, I could feel it in the same way you feel weather changing before you see it. My LinkedIn profile was visited again twice. A colleague at work mentioned casually that a woman she didn't know had asked about me at an industry networking event, describing me by name. The woman, my colleague said, had dark hair and seemed to know a lot about my professional history. I noted it. I told Patricia. "She's building a picture of you," Patricia said, "looking for something she can use." "Let her look," I said. And I meant it, because there was nothing to find. I had spent the past several weeks letting people in, deliberately and carefully. It had taken effort. I am, by nature, private. But I understood now that isolation was the thing they were counting on. Isolated, I was easier to doubt, easier to pressure, easier to wear down. So I talked to people. I told my two closest friends, Claire, whom I'd known since graduate school, and Miriam, my colleague and the person I trusted most at work, the truth. Not the dramatic version, not a performance of victimhood, just the facts, stated plainly. Both of them listened, asked the right questions, and said variations of the same thing. "What do you need from me?" What I needed was what they gave me. Presence, normalcy, the ongoing evidence that my life was larger than this crisis. Claire came over with her kids on Saturdays. Miriam and I had lunch every Thursday and talked mostly about work and occasionally about her own marriage and the ways love is complicated. These relationships held me in the ordinary world, while the legal process moved on its separate, slower track. I also joined a divorce support group, not online, in person, in the basement of a church in Naperville on Tuesday evenings. I went once expecting to find it morbid and stayed for the whole hour because the people there were so unsentimental about their own situations, so clear-eyed about what they had lost and what they intended to rebuild, that I left feeling something I hadn't expected: solidarity. There were women there who had been through worse. There were women who were 2 years out and laughing. That mattered. Daniel and Melissa, from what I could observe, had misread the situation entirely. They had expected, I think, a woman in pieces. They had expected grief to become compliance. They were watching for a crack, some sign that the pressure of December, Sandra's call, Melissa's threat, the prospect of a custody fight, had done what they intended it to do. What they saw instead was a woman who went to work, took her children to school, had dinner with friends, and responded to every legal communication promptly and without drama. I imagine that was, in its own way, more unsettling than a breakdown would have been. It was a Saturday in mid-February when Sandra Harrow appeared at my door. She did not call ahead. She knocked at 10:15 in the morning, while Lily was at soccer and Connor was at a friend's house, which I suspect she knew. Sandra had always tracked the children's schedules with the thoroughness of a woman who believed she was the center of the family's organizational universe. She was dressed carefully, as though she had considered her presentation. She held a container of something. A casserole, I realized, one of those gestures that functions as armor against the accusation of hostility. She smiled with her mouth and said, "I thought we should talk. Just the two of us. Please, Christine." My name, used warmly, deliberately. I opened the door. I did not invite her beyond the entryway. I noted the casserole and said neutrally, "Thank you." She set it down on the entry table and then she began. It was skillful. I'll give her that. She started with the children. Always the children, because she knew that was the floor of my world. She said Lily had cried on the phone to her grandmother. She said Connor had asked Daniel when everyone was going to stop being sad. Every sentence was designed to open a wound, to locate the point where love becomes a lever. She described these things with the practiced sorrow of a woman who had decided that her grief was evidence of my wrongdoing. She wanted me to feel responsible for the pain that Daniel had caused. I watched her perform it, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not the warm kind, the clinical kind. Then she pivoted. Daniel, she said, was devastated. He had made a mistake. She said the word mistake the way you'd describe spilling coffee, something minor and correctable. But he loved his family. He loved me. He was willing to go to counseling, to do whatever it took. And she, Sandra, was asking me, woman to woman, mother to mother, to think about what divorce would do to these children before I went any further. She was watching my face very carefully. Sandra, I said, I appreciate that you love your grandchildren. So do I. That's exactly why I'm making sure this process is handled correctly, so that they have stability and both of their parents fully present in a healthy way. A divorce doesn't take their father from them. She shifted. The warm approach adjusted, showing the edge underneath. Christine, I know that you've been talking to people, building your little coalition. The phrase, your little coalition, was meant to diminish. I want you to understand that Daniel has resources. He has people in this community who respect him. If you push this, if you go after everything, this will not go the way you think it will. There it was, the thing behind the casserole. Thank you for coming, Sandra, I said. I picked up the casserole and handed it back to her. I'll be forwarding the details of this conversation to my attorney. Her face did something complicated. A rapid passage through shock, then fury, then the reconstruction of composure. She took the casserole. She left. I closed the door. I stood in my own entryway and listened to her car pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street. The house was very quiet around me. I noticed, absurdly, that the entryway still smelled faintly of whatever she had cooked. Something with garlic and tomato, domestic, warm, a smell designed to soften. I went to the kitchen and opened the window. She was right about one thing. Daniel had resources. He had the larger professional network in this town, the longer history of visible community involvement, the kind of social capital that accumulates when you're a man who coaches Little League and knows everyone at the Bar Association events. I had always been the quieter one, the one who worked hard and showed up and did not particularly need to be seen. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt the cold weight of that. What if the people who knew us chose him? What if Sandra's implication about resources meant something more specific, something I hadn't anticipated? What if I had underestimated what they were capable of, how far they were willing to go? The fear was real. I sat with it for 3 minutes at my kitchen table. Let it be real, gave it the full honest weight it deserved. And then something happened in the middle of it. The fear turned over, and underneath it was rage, and underneath the rage was something harder and cleaner. Certainty. They had sent his mother to my door on a Saturday morning with a casserole and a threat. That was what they had. That was the measure of what they thought of me. That I could be softened with a home-cooked dish and a grandmother's tears and a vague warning about resources. They thought I was the kind of woman who could be managed. They had thought that since the beginning. That was, ultimately, their greatest miscalculation. I picked up my phone. I texted Patricia the summary of what Sandra had said with timestamps. Then I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I had a project milestone report due Monday. I worked on it for 2 hours, methodically and well. It was, as it turned out, some of the clearest work I had done in months. I was not going to be moved, and every time they tried to move me, I was going to remember the casserole at the door, and it was going to make me more certain, not less. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday in March at Patricia's office in Oak Brook. It was the formal discovery session in the divorce proceedings. Both parties present, both attorneys, a court reporter. Daniel had hired a lawyer named Garrett Fisk, who had an aggressive reputation and a manner that suggested he'd been told he was the smartest person in most rooms. He was not wrong that he was aggressive. He was wrong that it would be enough. Daniel came in looking tired beneath his composure. He had lost some weight since December, and the lines around his eyes were deeper. He was wearing the charcoal suit he saved for serious occasions, the one he'd worn to job interviews and to his father's funeral. I noticed, and then I set the noticing aside. I was not here to feel what I had felt for 14 years. I was here to finish what I'd started. Melissa was not present. She had no formal standing here. But her presence was embedded in everything. In the documentation Patricia had prepared, in the photographs from Carla Fuentes, in the phone records that Daniel's own attorney had apparently not known we had obtained through proper legal discovery. The early part of the deposition was procedural. Financial disclosures, asset accounting, property documentation. I had spent weeks preparing for this with Patricia, going through every document, every account, every asset with the same attention I brought to complex project plans at work. I knew our financial picture better than Daniel did. He had always been careless about specifics. He trusted that the numbers would work out, that I would track the details, that the infrastructure of our life would maintain itself. It had. I had built it. And now I knew every beam and junction of it. When Garrett Fisk began the questioning about the nature of our marriage's breakdown, his approach was what Patricia had predicted. He tried to establish a narrative of mutual deterioration. He asked about my travel for work. He asked about my emotional availability, a phrase clearly chosen to suggest neglect. He asked with careful neutrality whether there had been other parties involved on my side of the marriage. I looked at him steadily and answered every question in factual, complete sentences. No defensiveness, no elaboration, no visible anger. Patricia had drilled me on this for weeks, sitting across from me in her conference room, firing questions, watching my hands, correcting my posture when stress entered it. I executed it exactly as we had practiced. Then Patricia began her questioning of Daniel. She asked about Atlanta. She produced the receipt. Not a hotel receipt, as I had initially assumed, but a restaurant reservation and a credit card charge to a boutique hotel in Buckhead under Daniel's name, and a second name. She placed it on the table and let the silence sit for several seconds. No one in the room spoke. The court reporter's fingers paused above her machine. Daniel looked at Garrett Fisk. Garrett Fisk's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the slight tightening around the eyes of an attorney who's just been handed information his client failed to share with him. Patricia asked about Melissa Wells. Daniel said she was a colleague. Patricia placed the photographs on the table. The restaurant in River North, the parking garage, the apartment building on North Michigan Avenue. She asked about each one, chronologically, precisely, with the unhurried confidence of someone who had more pages left. Daniel answered each in the controlled monotone of a man who has been told by his attorney to admit as little as possible. But with each photograph, the control required slightly more effort. His jaw was very tight. His hands, which had been flat on the table, moved to his lap where I could no longer see them. A small tell I recognized from 14 years of sitting across from him. Then Patricia produced the phone records. Not the content of messages, those had not been obtainable through proper discovery, but the metadata, the frequency of contact between Daniel's number and Melissa's, extending back 22 months. 22 months. A pattern so consistent and regular it mapped onto a relationship, not a work exchange. Call logs printed on clean white paper, column after column of dates and durations. Patricia did not dramatize it. She simply placed it on the table and read several entries aloud, quietly in her professional voice. Garrett Fisk objected. Patricia was within the bounds of legal discovery and said so calmly with citations. The room felt very still. The court reporter was typing. Outside the window, Oak Brook traffic moved past, ordinary and indifferent to the fact that a marriage of 14 years was being formally, irrevocably dissected in this beige conference room. And then something happened that I had not predicted. Daniel looked at me. He hadn't until that moment. He'd been directing his attention to his attorney, to the court reporter, to the middle distance. But in the moment after the phone records were placed on the table, he looked directly at me. And what was in his face was not anger, not defiance, not the careful blankness he had maintained since December. It was something I had not expected after 14 years of thinking I knew him. It was shame. Not performed shame. Not the shame of someone who has been caught and is calculating the optics, the real kind which is quieter and uglier, the kind that a person cannot entirely control. It lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then he looked away, but I had seen it, and I held it carefully, the way you hold something that is painful and true at the same time. I did not soften. I did not change my expression. I looked back at Patricia and waited for her next question. When the deposition concluded and we were outside in the parking lot, Patricia said, with the measured satisfaction of someone who never over-promises, "That went well." "I know," I said. I drove home along 88 in the gray March afternoon, and I felt for the first time in months that the weight I had been carrying had shifted from burden to ballast. It was still there, but it was mine, and it was holding me in place rather than dragging me under. The road was long and flat and familiar. I drove it without music, in the particular silence of someone who has just done the thing they were afraid they couldn't do. The settlement negotiations lasted 6 weeks, and they were exactly what Patricia had told me to expect: exhausting, detailed, occasionally hostile, and ultimately decisive. Garrett Fisk's aggressive strategy had been built on 2 assumptions: that I had limited documentation of the affair and its duration, and that the custody question was his strongest leverage point. The deposition had dismantled the first assumption entirely. The second one he held on to longer, with the particular tenacity of an attorney who has built a case around a premise he cannot yet afford to abandon. But it too collapsed, for a reason I had not anticipated. In April, Melissa Wells was transferred to Daniel's direct report chain at his company. She had apparently been quietly promoted in the months before the divorce proceedings, in the way that people sometimes are when someone with influence is advocating quietly on their behalf. Someone in the HR department flagged the relationship as a workplace policy violation. The company launched an internal investigation. I learned about it through Carla Fuentes, who was still, at my instruction, monitoring the situation. Patricia incorporated it into our proceedings immediately, with the efficiency of someone who recognized a structural gift when it arrived. The moral character argument Garrett Fisk had been quietly building. The suggestion that Daniel was the more stable parent, the more conventional one, the one whose life had not been disrupted by conflict, developed a significant structural problem when it became clear that his relationship with Melissa was actively under investigation by his own employer, and that he had, for 22 months, conducted it on company time and company property. Daniel was placed on administrative leave in late April. I heard about it from Carla on a Thursday evening. I was sitting on my porch with a glass of water and the last of the spring light, and I listened to her tell me, and I thanked her, and I hung up. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the specific gravity of watching something inevitable arrive. The settlement we reached in early May gave me the house. The children's stability was the court's primary concern, and I was the parent with the established home, the consistent schedule, the clean professional record, and no workplace misconduct investigation hanging over the proceedings. Daniel received his retirement accounts, his car, and a portion of our joint savings. He paid child support calculated precisely according to Illinois guidelines. Spousal support was structured for 3 years, declining incrementally given my independent income and the trajectory of my career. I got primary residential custody. Daniel got generous visitation. Every other weekend, 1 evening per week, and equal time during school breaks. I had wanted this. Not as punishment. I did not want my children's father to be absent from their lives. I wanted them to have 2 parents who were present and stable, and I wanted to be the one who maintained the constant. This arrangement allowed both. Patricia had told me early on, the goal isn't to destroy him. The goal is to protect you and your children. I had agreed with that, and I had meant it, and the settlement reflected it. The day the settlement was signed, we were in a conference room in Oak Brook for the last time. Garrett Fisk shook Patricia's hand across the table and said something quiet to her that I couldn't hear. Patricia nodded with the contained expression of someone receiving a compliment she had anticipated and did not require. I noticed that Daniel's attorney looked, beneath his professionalism, like a man who had gone into a room confident and come out recalibrated. I signed my name on the last page. Christine Harrow, in the signature I had written 10,000 times. I sat back in my chair and let the pen rest on the table. Daniel was at the other end of the same conference table, and for a moment we were simply 2 people who had shared 14 years and 2 children and a porch that needed repainting every spring. He looked at the signed document for a long moment. Then he looked up, not at me, at the window. Outside it was raining. A steady April rain. The kind that softens the ground and smells like beginning. He didn't speak to me. I didn't speak to him. There was nothing left to say that belonged in that room. Everything that needed to be said had been said on paper, with documentation, with the weight of law behind it. We left through different doors. On the drive home, I called Dana. She answered on the first ring, the way she always did when she knew I might need her. "It's done," I said. A pause, the kind that holds everything unsaid and doesn't need to say it. Then, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly, the way I had learned to think about things. "Like someone who just finished a very long project," I said. "And it came in on time." She laughed. I laughed too in my car on the interstate in the April rain, and it was the first real laugh in a very long time. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and true, not performed for anyone, not managed, just real. There was no dramatic reversal, no apology from Daniel, not a real one, not the kind that costs something. No moment of spectacular public reckoning that would make a satisfying movie scene. Real victories don't always look like that. Sometimes a real victory is a signed piece of paper and a drive home in the rain and the knowledge that you did not compromise on the thing that mattered, that you did not let fear fold you in half, that you went in with documentation and preparation and 14 months of patience, and you came out with your children's home and your financial stability and every decision made on your own terms, by your own hand. That was enough. It was, in fact, everything. Summer came in slowly that year, the way it does in northern Illinois, tentative at first, then suddenly enormous. The kids got out of school in June, and I took 2 weeks off work and drove them to Michigan, to a lake house my college friend owned and offered freely. We swam and kayaked and ate corn on the cob and went to bed sunburned and content. I remember lying on the dock one evening while Lily and Connor caught fireflies in the grass behind me, listening to the water and thinking, "This is still my life. It is different. But it is mine, and it is good." I was 40 years old, and I was starting over, and I was not afraid of it. At work, I was promoted to Vice President of Project Operations in September. It was something I had been working toward for 3 years, a conversation that had been ongoing with leadership. The timing, as it turned out, was exactly right. The firm had won a significant municipal contract, and they needed someone with both the experience and the bandwidth to lead it. I had the experience. I had, for the first time in years, the bandwidth. Miriam took me to dinner to celebrate. We went somewhere nice in the city, and we stayed until they turned the lights down on us. I dated no one for the first year. I had decided, consciously, that I needed the full experience of being alone and whole before I invited anyone else into my life. It was not loneliness, or rather, it was, sometimes, but a manageable kind, the kind that reminds you that you are a person who has something to offer. I had dinner with friends. I read books I'd been meaning to read for a decade. I ran 3 mornings a week along the river path near our house. In the spring of the following year, I met a man named James at a professional conference in downtown Chicago. He was a structural engineer from Seattle, in town for the week. We talked for 3 hours at the conference reception and then walked to a restaurant nearby and talked for 3 more. He was funny and direct and interested in what I said and not performing interest. There is a difference, and I knew it now. I gave him my number. He called the next day. It was slow and it was real, and it was, in every way that mattered, different from anything I had known. Lily took to him eventually. 11-year-old girls are skeptical by nature and by right, and I respected that. Connor liked him almost immediately, mostly because James watched baseball and had opinions about it. We moved carefully, the way people move when they understand that children's stability is not negotiable. James understood this without being told. As for Daniel, he was asked to resign from his company in July, 6 months after the internal investigation began. The details were not made public, but the professional community is smaller than it appears, and I heard through the kind of quiet information networks that professionals maintain that the resignation had not been entirely voluntary. He was out of work for several months. The income gap had implications for the child support calculations, which Patricia handled swiftly and correctly. He and Melissa stayed together. Through the investigation, through his job loss, through the public awkwardness of being the couple whose relationship had begun the way it did. I will not claim no satisfaction in that because I am human, but what I observed on the occasions I had unavoidable contact with Daniel around the children was not a man living happily. He was quieter than he'd been, older in a way that wasn't just time. Melissa, who had cost him his job and his marriage and his reputation in a community where he'd been known and liked, was, I imagine, a more complicated person to come home to than she'd seemed across a dinner table. Sandra Harrow stopped calling me entirely. She sent Christmas cards to the children and nothing else, which was appropriate, and I made sure the children could receive them without commentary from me. My children were healthy and loved and held in the ordinary way of everyday life, which is the only way that matters. Connor made his travel baseball team in the spring. Lily began writing stories, long ones, in a notebook she kept in her nightstand. She showed me one. I read it and told her it was very good, because it was. The house was the same house, with the same porch I repainted every spring, but it felt different from the inside, lighter, more honestly itself. I was, and this is a simple thing to say and a large thing to mean, happy. People ask me what I would do differently. Honestly, I would have trusted myself sooner. Fear is loud. Clarity, when it finally comes, is quiet. But it lasts. I learned that the moment you stop managing other people's comfort at the expense of your own truth, you become very difficult to manipulate. I learned that preparation is not coldness. It is self-respect in action. If you had been sitting at that birthday table looking across at the woman your husband invited, what would you have done? Leave your answer below. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe. Thank you for listening.